All right, guys, so we're going to do an Unleashed video and fly through a couple things. And here we're looking at some kind of spaceship I tossed together. It might have like a hangar and a little runway at the front of it, maybe a smaller one at the top. Now, a lot of guys are curious how I come up with stuff like this. And it's very rapid and it's very fast, but more or less model some rather interesting little basic parts and pieces and components. Start kit bashing them together. So I want some kind of like spaceship that's going to be like a carrier. Maybe just start making a carrier type spaceship thing. It doesn't have to necessarily be great. But a lot of times what you can do with this is just like I was showing in that Navy ships inspiration video or whatever. The idea there in that, well, what I did in that video, I took an image of a ship and kind of mirrored it and flipped it and combined it with itself. Anyway, you can do that with your 3D models. You can just Shift D, duplicate this, Control M, middle mouse click, flip it upside down, scale it, move it, intersect it. You don't have to combine them together necessarily. Just to get ideas going, this is great. Now, when you're doing a really big object like a ship, it's like doing environment art, right? So this is going to take a long time to process to get kind of going the way I would want it, but at least I have a visual cue on like what I'm trying to do or create here. And so I kept working with it a little bit, and I am making edits here as well. It's not just the same part over and over necessarily as it is. I might be stretching them out, doing stuff like that, scaling them, all kinds of other fun stuff, mirroring them. Just keep modeling though, very fast, very rapid. For example, this middle section here is the same thing, just scaled and rotated around itself and tossed in there, right? So we end up with something like that. Add some materials, you can get a little bit more of a idea of what's going on here. Create some big generic parts and kind of intersect it across through everything. It's just going to kill off some of that detail as well, so it makes it not quite as much visual noise, perhaps. And then you could take these things, you render them out if you want with a camera. Use film, transparent. In my case, I got an HDRI with world opacity, so I'm just going to do a viewport render. But if you want, you can do viewport renders, but it's better to use cameras, generally speaking. You do something like this. So now you can go into a photo program, Photoshop, create a Clip Studio perhaps or something. You can start like photo bashing on this, hand painting it, texturing it, drawing, doing line art. Come up with concept designs that way if you want. You add materials, procedural materials, add more lighting, and get it all set up exactly the way you want it. It can turn out really well. So we're going to move on from that one though. Just trying to fly through this as fast as possible. And we're going to look at this mech here. Okay. So originally this was what was modeled. This guy over here took a couple hours, but we got it kind of going. It's not maybe functional in the knees and stuff, but the main ideas are there. The main shapes can make it more functional later if needed. And what's kind of cool about this is if you take time to model something like that, so this is the same one here. I've separated into basically two parts, legs, top section, and we can rearrange this now with the legs and try them, further back, a little bit wider perhaps. Maybe we need to create some clearance for them. That's okay. We can always modify these. This one, for example, we just threw the legs way out here, but it's the same piece, right? So we get quite a bit of variation with just those alone. But we can start mixing that up with like symmetrize or mirror modifiers and doing bisecting on the mirrors. Get some rather interesting designs almost by accident. When you use a mirror modifier, you might want to use an empty as your object to mirror across, because these empties you can move and you can find just cool things you can do with it. Like you can rotate them, right? And move them around. You got to make sure it's set to bisect though. You might flip them as well, so you can try them one way or the other. See how it works out for you anyways. And that's how a lot of these were put together. So even though like the base of this was, put together in a few hours, and these other ones, they don't take no time at all. It's just a mirror modifier, repositioning the legs and trying out ideas with those empties perhaps. And I think this is where a lot of guys go wrong. They get maybe too caught up in all the detail of their models that they're not thinking about like the big shapes, the big forms, how to build up complexity fast and rapidly. You want to spend as little time trying to get the big idea going as you can, and then start working details. That should take you the most time, I think. So a good chunk of your work should come together rather rapidly, and then working it out and finessing it into a proper model perhaps should take the longest time. So over here, we still have things very improper. A lot of these legs just don't, they're not attached to nothing. They're just hovering. We can add different legs or, reposition things so they're functional. But just to get an idea of like the aesthetic here that we might want or might be going for, we can do things like that all day long, right? This piece here was added in. So just like the big ship, you can add things that make them a little bit less noisy. That one got squished like that, and that's what all these are. Okay, it's the same model. They're just squished and used as little caps for the joints, perhaps. So it starts to look a little bit nicer that way. Now, this is where things I think get kind of fun. So let me actually remove a couple of these mirrors here. This one we can apply, so Control A. Okay, and I'm going to take this mesh here, and I'm going to remesh it real quick. Okay, we're just going to use the default settings for now. Nothing special. We can grab these two, grab the middle, Control L, copy modifiers. We can do that. Okay, and it's a little bit softer now. Not super impressive looking or anything with that voxel resolution. We could crank it up a little bit if we want here. It still isn't going to hurt. But before I go any further, I want to Control A, apply rotation and scale on these particular ones, because I know the scales are off because I've been doing all kinds of weird kit bashing. And if you don't want to apply rotation so you can maintain a local rotation, you can do that. That's fine. Just apply scale in that case. But you can see the voxel sizes do matter with the scaling there. So you can do that, apply the scale if you need to. You get different kind of voxel remeshes going. Some guys like to make their objects bigger and then voxel remesh because it allows you to add more mesh into it using different numbers here. So I'm just going to crank them up a little bit. And this is what's kind of cool here, right? So I'm going to set origin on this to geometry. These ones here, let's do Shift S, cursor to selected, set origin to the 3D cursor so it's at the center. Okay, we'll use that later maybe if needed. We definitely could place it elsewhere. So we can place origin points on the model itself. You see if we tab into edit mode, we still have our regular mesh here, right? And this was made up of many, many parts and pieces. This needs to be joined to that one, so Control J. This one I can delete. There, something like that. But we can refine the origin points off of this mesh, right? So we need this mesh in order to control origins. I want to point that out. It's pretty important. So when I want to work on this further, I might take all of this in edit mode, hit A, P, separate by loose parts, and do that number. So they're all going to have their own modifiers now. Okay, they all have the origin point set there in the back, but if I ever need to reset the origin point, you grab like a face, Shift S, cursor selected, go back to object mode, set origin to geometry. Now it's got origin point in the center of this cylinder, which is good because we might want to actually keep these combined. We might take this, this, and this, and this, and join it to this piece, Control J. And so we can voxel it up. When you're working on things that are bigger, right? So this, if we're going to have fully work out a mech like this, a lot of this could be mid-poly workflow, like the main body pieces, seamless textures, trim sheets, decals, all that fun stuff, material blends. But some of it still might be high to low bakes, like pieces like this. And this is where, you know, like if we're going to do high to low bake, this faceting is not going to cut it, obviously, right? So what's going on here is I got sharps on it, but when you shade auto smooth, if you apply that, Control A, you get those sharps back, right? And those sharps are kind of important because we can grab one, hit Shift G, select by sharpness, and Shift E it up. If we have a mostly quad mesh, it doesn't have to always be perfect. You can see there's an ingon here. But if we do that, let's turn these off a second and add a subdivision, okay? We could subdivide this, guys. And we could subdivide it up quite heavily. Something like so, right? You see we got an error. We cannot have errors. That doesn't fly. We can't use that. So we got to X, delete that. Delete that. Alt click, Alt Shift click, Control E, bridge edge loops. We can do something like that. But we got a decent mesh now for a voxel remesh that won't be faceted. So next time we do that, it'll be okay. We can apply the subdivision, Control A. When we come back into edit mode, we see we have this going on. We're going to have to be careful with the remesher here. I'm going to show you one in a second. But when this remeshes, we don't have the faceting, okay? And if we, like, let's say we remeshed it very high, we still might get faceting in here. You can always just add a subdivision again. But you might have to place it at the top. That's going to subdivide it one more time or 2 times, whatever you set here. It might actually get rid of some of that faceting, right? In our case, it isn't doing much, is it? But maybe we do it one time, apply it. And yeah, it's just a little bit denser. So yeah, it shouldn't be picking that up as much, but that might just be a problem with the remesh. All right. They're not too bad anyways. So if we were to, like we can do this non-destructively like this. We can remesh and smooth. Maybe that's what you want, right? Not often going to be exactly what you want. You're going to have to smooth it out, of course. Okay. Shade it smooth. And when you shade it smooth, uncheck keep sharp edges. And that's going to make all your sharp edges disappear, basically. So it's going to remove them. And we'll try a little bit higher of a resolution. So yeah, you can see where this becomes a balancing act. And it can become very dense. We're going up in triangle count right now, up to 1 million, right? So it can become very dense if you want it to. Something like that. Now, this is where it gets tricky. I don't want to destroy this because if I ever need to set the origin points, I want this mesh still so I can get in there and do it, right? And maybe not even with the subdivision applied like that necessarily. But Shift D and duplicate it. We can apply the remesh and we can apply the smooth if we want. Now we can just work on this one piece here and pull it out so we can see it. This is where things get tricky because if we go into edit mode real quick, we don't want sharps and creases here. Okay. It's going to like make the remesher kind of behave badly and not maybe the way you want. But if we look very closely, and I'm going to fix my view, I keep clipping. So I will type like 1 there. These are all poles, guys. So like in poles here with an edge or 3 edges coming out of a single vertex. And we got E poles with 5 edges or more coming out of a single vertex. This doesn't sculpt very good, generally speaking, and it's problematic. This is why a lot of times using like a perfect quad subdivision mesh is actually very decent to sculpt on. Using like a multi-resolution modifier, it's actually pretty great as well. So like remeshing this way, while you can do it, I don't always like doing it that way. There's definitely times I want to do things a little bit different. So like I might take this piece real quick, just duplicate it. We'll get rid of the remesh on it. We're not even going to use that one. And get rid of the smooth too. We don't need that. And we can do things like coming in here, we can go into sculpt mode with this one, maybe remove our creases if we're not going to use them. And if we have any sharps, Control E, clear sharps, right? We can go into sculpt mode. We can do face sets, initialize face sets by normals. A lot of times you can get this to break up pretty good when your geo's set up in this way, right? But at a certain point, it goes kind of crazy. You don't want that necessarily. You might end up using face sets. And sometimes it's really good because you just don't want to work on something inside here by accident. You can hide it and you can work on the outside a little bit more comfortably without accidentally modifying these interior pieces when your brushes kind of bleed through the mesh or whatever, which can happen. But so face sets can be important. If you want to set them first, this is the time to do it. I'm not going to look at them for now, so I'm going to turn them off. But when we do a remesh, if we just press R and set a resolution, we're doing the same thing as the modifier more or less. But the sculpting remesh has a little hidden feature right here, which is fix poles. And it doesn't fix all the poles, but it tries to fix a lot of them. So if we go in here, we press R, and hold Shift, and we drag it to the right. We set the resolution, we Control R. Hopefully we didn't set it too high. And we'll get a good remesh out of it with 1 million faces, in our case, 2 million. So also, by the way, if you're on this newest version of Blender system, change it to Vulkan and restart Blender and save your preferences and then restart Blender. OpenGL doesn't perform as good as Vulkan, okay, for especially high density sculpts and stuff, but you can still see it's, you know, it's doable. But we got a nice remesh out of it. And now, make sure I use the right drop down here. A lot of those little issues, like there's still some in here, but there's a lot less, and that's good. That's kind of what you want. And that way we don't run into as many problems, right? They do tend to smooth a little bit different with that, because it's like a little edge now. So that can sometimes cause problems, but for the most part, I think that you'll find that it works out a little bit better anyways. Because I know we can do like a mesh filter and smooth, and we can drag a little and smooth everything out. Cavity here can be very misleading if you're using cavity. What we see is what we get for the most part without cavity, okay? If you were to bake this, some of that might show up in a normal map a little bit, but it's so minor that you usually can't even see it due to the pixel sizes and whatnot. But this is why we go through this whole mess like this, because we got the origin point in the middle now. And with the origin point in the middle, we can use radial symmetry, okay? So in our case, it should be Y. We can set it to something like 6. Now we can start doing hard surface sculpting. You know, I don't want to make this video all about hard surface sculpting, but we'll do a little bit and then we'll kind of end the video, right? So I'm going to drag that up, right click here, join that down so we don't have the timeline. You can come over here, click, hold shift, drag to the left a little, and maybe just hit it by number a little bit. We should be able to see all of our tools on like that one toolbar, like that anyways. A lot easier in my opinion. But we do have radial symmetry, so now we can use something like the trim tool. We can get in here and start working. This is where you run into an issue. If it was a multi-resolution modifier, usually you can fix multi-res problems by using the multi-res eraser brush. And but we don't have that. So how do we work on this non-destructively? Because everything we're going to do right now would be destructive. If we mess up, it's a permanent thing if we can't control Z back and fix it, obviously. This is where the Sculpt Layers add-on comes into play. Sculpt Layers add-on works pretty well, but the trick with it is that you can't change the geometry anymore as far as like doing booleans or anything like that. So you got to make sure the shape you have is the shape you want, that it's, you're not going to be able to edit the mesh anymore, basically. You can deform it with the sculpting tools, but you can't edit it. You can't remesh it. So really good because you can work in layers, but you lose a little bit of flexibility. With this setup here, it's very destructive, very easy to mess up, but you can continue to do a lot of stuff. You can still do booleans on this if you want. You can go through it. You can do subdivision mesh and boolean it from it. So you can create like little weird curves and stuff. You can do a lot of different sculpting techniques and using alphas. And if you want, you can remesh it to try to correct some of the geometry so you can continue editing it further. So a lot of times doing it destructive has its own benefits. Doing it non-destructive or using an add-on like Sculpt Layers add-on has its own benefits. Doing a multi-res has its own benefits. So there's different ways of sculpting geometry, basically different types of topos you can use and techniques and strategy. I want to point that out because this one's going to be the most flexible, but it's not the most forgiving. So by the way, if we have shadows on, which I do, shadows is a big performance hit. Okay. So you might want to turn that off. You can sculpt on some other kind of geo here and maybe use cavities and set those on a little bit, perhaps. All right. So it just looks a little bit nicer. This is actually a pretty comfortable sculpt setup. Either using this tan one or like this kind of like clay here or this clay or whatever. You can use all these different things. Anyways, go back to gray for now, but trim tool. So the trim tool, you see the circle, right? As we move it, it rotates around the edge. When you click with this trim tool, it stays in that direction. So when you pull it in, it doesn't move. It stays, that circle stays in that same orientation. This is how you're able to get away with kind of things like this. And you can see if we do it a little too aggressively and maybe not big enough, it's not soft enough. It's going to, I like to do little circles with it usually to keep it a little bit softer maybe and a little bit larger. And trying to keep it going in the same direction for the most part. We can do trims like this and we can do radial symmetry. Now, the only thing is that this is an asymmetrical object. So if I start doing things up here, yeah, it doesn't maybe give us all the results we want. We have to be very careful that we turn these on and off as needed and very careful with our settings because we can really screw things up very fast. For example, if I'm using a mask here, radial symmetry on right now, okay, that works fine, but you see it starts masking the inside. The bigger your brush is, a lot of times that's going to happen, right? Doesn't matter if you're over here or not, it's going to do that. So front faces only seems like it would be the fix. A lot of times this does actually help with things like that. So it won't do, those sections in there, but these are still considered front faces, all right? So that doesn't help in that case. You can see it doesn't do over here. So even though we have symmetry on right now, it doesn't do those back ones, okay? So front faces, on and off, you need to try that one out. Fall off, you can change to projected, which can be quite good as well. So you can say like if you're going to do projection, and it's going to get slow on a dense mesh, but it goes all the way through the mesh, okay? So projection is kind of interesting like that. Usually you probably wouldn't use it in that manner. You'd probably do more like panel lines and things like that. But you can see with radial symmetry on, it's pretty slow. So maybe we turn that off. We go through here. It's still pretty slow, but it's a little bit faster now. Okay. So it's a lot more usable. Our brush techniques, we have regular draws. Let's turn projected off real quick. We got, regular spacing is usually your stroke method. I mean, we have other ones we can use, of course, like Alt-E is the menu for this. You can do lines very fast. You can do spacing, default. and dots is more aggressive, a little bit stronger. There's also a curve one, which is a little bit of a pain to set up, so I'm not going to do it. But between line and those spacing and dots, you should be pretty good to go. If you use an alpha, you'll want to use anchored, where you draw out something like that. And sometimes you'll use drag dots, where like if you have a circle and you want to create a circle, you can drag it around. That's drag dot. Okay? So really good ones there. We also have the ability to, with certain ones like spacing and line, you might be able to do stabilized. Actually, line doesn't do that. Dots and spacing should have it. You should be able to do stabilized stroke. This is a shortcut. It's now Shift S. We can turn on stabilized stroke, and you can modify that as needed, make it more or less responsive as needed. Tweaking those values there, so we can create really clean, nice edges and stuff. Not too crazy, right? So this is where it all kind of goes, and it becomes fun. We can just have, go to town and just do what we want here. Use symmetry, don't use symmetry. Do whatever you got to do. Use the line tool. Change your brush sizes. The smaller your brush is, the sharper it becomes. The more you zoom in, the bigger it becomes, usually. Right? When it's bigger, it's softer, basically. Smaller, it's sharper. You got to start figuring out how to balance that amount of sharpness. With the line tool, if you hold Alt, it will do a straight up and down, left and right. So if you're in an ortho view while you're orbiting, you can hold Alt, jump into a top view maybe, or you can Alt, middle mouse click, and gesture. You can do things like this all day long. And so you can make some really rather interesting kind of arrangements and setups here very fast without even trying, really. It's very, very quick and easy to do. If I wanted to do, I don't know, something like this. Good. And we can switch to like dots, maybe turn, if you have brush smoothing on, turn it off. Maybe just fill in an area. Maybe go back to the line tool. You can see where this kind of goes. Like we're able to do things creatively and freely this way, which is really nice. But like that line was not perfectly straight. You do have to be very, very careful with your masks and how you do this, right? A lot of these have a little bit sharper corners. We could press A, smooth, turn auto off, adjust the amount manually. As we smooth something, and then we press A and increase contrast, it's going to round these areas that were sharp. Sometimes that's desirable, and you can adjust how smooth it becomes or how much more contrast you get out of it just by holding Shift and dragging left to right there. So we can do things like this, guys, all day long. Mesh filter, inflate. We could press A, use the mask menu, right? Invert. And usually, I would say try to push things out, okay? Because if we push it in, these start crossing over each other. It becomes rather crazy looking. In general, I would say Boolean in-gun model things more than you sculpt. It's usually a better idea. As long as you can keep the resolution kind of high, right? But if you have to go do this stuff later on, certainly do it. And you should. I mean, it does bring up the quality of the model overall. And surprisingly, we're just going to work, I guess, mostly this one piece here. Oh, use a mask tool, not the inflate tool. Surprisingly, this isn't as hard as you think it is after you get used to doing it. It takes a little bit of time to learn, perhaps, but it's definitely a lot of fun. And you'll be able to go through this at a certain point and realize, like, you got to hold control here, maybe. And, oops, hold control. Might have to remove a little on that side or remove a little on this side and maybe make some things sharper and maybe get rid of some of those round corners or edges, realign things, stuff like that. So a lot of design aspects to this. And that's what's kind of crazy about doing sci-fi, hard surface sci-fi stuff, is it has more to do with kind of like graphic design, or I like to compare it to like font design, than it does actual like modeling necessarily. It's not like necessarily hard modeling techniques. It's more about creating cool designs. And so we invert, inflate. Like once you feel comfortable modeling, you should be able to do this kind of stuff relatively easily. Let's use the draw tool real quick. In the draw tool, we can set a fall off custom, increase the contrast of it, that fall off. Now we can Alt E and use drag dots. And we can do stuff like this as well. So we can make custom curves there if we wanted to. I'm just going to use this one setup for now, but we can get that placed exactly where we want it. Okay. Make it a little smaller. We can hold control or use the negative option up there. But we can start to work things out in this manner, changing sizes. Okay. If we need a little detail there like that, maybe we can. So you can see how much we went. Basically, this is the same shape. It's just a little larger. But we went from something rather, yeah, it was okay, to a little bit more special, right? Like there's a little bit more going on with this one. We can do this to the whole object, all over the place, basically. And, you know, you might not always want to use projected. Sometimes it can be very bad. But the line tool itself is very good in general. It's just a little bit slow sometimes to get it working because it does take a little bit of finesse here to fill it in and get straight edges, and especially on curves, because like if you're trying to make a straight edge against this cylinder, you can't use a line tool all the way around necessarily. You're going to use a regular brush for that spacing, right? And this we want to fill. I wish we had a fill bucket for this kind of thing, but we don't. So we'll use dots. It's more aggressive, better for filling. For the spacing, what it does is it sometimes create transparency, and dots will do it too, but it's not as likely. You can see here, spacing can start soft and become strong a little bit easier, especially if you have your brush strength is set to the pin pressure, right? So, but you see like these are just off in these corners a little bit. That is a problem. You do not want to do that. It happens very easily, and you're going to have to go through and just very carefully try to line up the edges here and cut it back, holding control, right? With the line tool. Yeah, make sure you click control first, right? And then do it. So you'll be able to work them out at some point. If you blur it a little bit, it may even still show up. But sometimes blurring it, re-increasing the contrast can be useful. It's up to you, judgment call. But yeah, you could do this all day, right, guys? So you mesh filter, invert, use inflate. We're not doing symmetry on that one, right? So we just hold shift, bring it out. Shift, bring it out. Okay, be careful with that one. You do that all day. Really easy. There's, of course, other tricks, but for the most part, you're going to be using a lot of that probably. Now, Control E, use line, set it to projected. Don't do radial symmetry for this one. Just go all the way through the mesh. Very cool little details you can add like this. Maybe smooth them a bit, mesh filter them. You can inflate or deflate as needed. You could do something like that, perhaps. You want it a little bit crispier, maybe don't smooth it as much, right? You can do that as well. Something like that. Certain situations, you want to do like little cutouts of areas. I would say booleans still work better in general. But sometimes it's really hard to do. So like in this area, let's say I wanted to do, turn projected off before we screw everything up. And say I just want to do like a little box in this area. And I want to push it in a bit. These are more challenging to do than you probably realize. First of all, we're doing this on an edge that doesn't have the extra geometry here to support this, right? There's no extra faces in here. That's why it fades kind of crazy like. And it doesn't work out that well. So you don't always get away with things like this. Sometimes you have to do remeshes. Not probably what you want to hear, right? You couldn't do that if you were using sculpt layers. But you can do remeshes. So if you press R, all you're going to do here is press R and maybe increase or even decrease the resolution slightly. But that's going to prevent an error from happening where you get all kinds of little nonsense geo that pops up all across the model. Just remesh it, right? It might take a little second, especially at 2 million or higher. We'll get something like this. We may have to redo our mask. We might be able to save it by smoothing it and increasing the contrast again. Sometimes that works out, but I don't think it usually works out that well. And I guess we got something else going on right there. I'll just smooth that out. We'll pretend that didn't exist there. Let's go ahead and just use the line tool. You can see how sharp that is, right? It's a little bit better now. You still need a bigger brush. It needs to be a little softer. So. Okay. And so something like this, trim it up a little if needed. You invert it. You might use that trim tool, which works generally pretty well with this. So you can like say, I'm going to push all of this down. but it is a little bit rough, right? So you still might have to like go in here, smooth this, remesh it, do all kinds of other nonsense. Um, this can be problematic, right? So when you're trying to do things like this, it definitely can happen to you. Now, you can also try maybe smoothing it a bit more. You might get a little bit better of a result. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You could try just doing sculpt draws as well and just pushing surfaces down. Alt E, turn that to spacing again. The sculpt draw, pushing it down a little bit can be quite useful. Um, it might keep it a little bit softer, but there's little tricks like this all over basically where you can start to work this kind of stuff out. And then you can use something like Plateau. And Plateau also tends to do a good job in here instead of the trim tool. So you can see it just depends on like the combination of tools sometimes. You have to fiddle around with it a lot to get a better understanding of like what you can and cannot get away with and when you might need a remesh and not remesh. But once you play around with it and you get the idea and the hang of it, it's not too bad. You can use a smooth tool, low strength, for example, and just kind of go in there and blur that up a little bit for a very small detail on a surface. If it's not like right in the camera view, it's not really a big deal. It should be fine. All right. Like the player is not looking at this. Like if this was like a weapon and we're looking at it, it's like a scope or something. That might be very noticeable, right? We might need to go a little higher resolution or break this into its own part or piece here so we can remesh that at a higher resolution. Blender likes to work with multiple meshes up to like, it depends on your system, but for this kind of setup, I find that having more objects works better, right? I could take my scenes up to 30, 50 million triangles, not a problem. But I can't do that on one mesh. So I'm usually around 3 million, it starts to slow down a little bit. So I'd want to, of course, try to use multiple meshes. And then if that's the case, you split things apart, basically. You don't use them all together. It'll help you out there working on these kinds of projects. But yeah, you can do a lot of finesse here. You can get some really good results going too. And it's just rather cool. It's rather interesting. So, if you want to split this kind of a thing out, um, it does have split tools here in sculpting, but usually they don't work out very well. I would use booleans with like hard ops or box cutter and just doing the splits that way. Otherwise, you got to set up those booleans manually. I've shown that in other videos. I don't recommend doing it that way because you got really dense mesh now and it's kind of a pain to do. But you can do it destructively with box cutter. It kind of does it all behind the scenes, anyways, the same way you would do it manually. But it's like a script. So you don't have to do it manually. Just use the tool, use it destructively, not non-destructively. There's little options in box cutter to do it at the top, the play symbol and the pause symbol, and destructive and non-destructive. But that's why you get paid add-ons, guys. It makes life easier. It's not that you can't do things in vanilla Blender. Like the modeling here is all just kind of standard modeling. Just a little bit of booleans, perhaps in some place I might have used, but for the most part, it was just standard modeling, nothing special, right? So, and then we can go back and we can refine like crazy. So we can do this whole piece, make it exactly how we want it to look, make it look really awesome. Lots of detail. We can just do an insane amount of detail on it now. We can still do booleans on it. So there's nothing to stop us from just doing another boolean on this. And then remeshing it and then fixing those edges up that we boolean out. We don't necessarily have to re-smooth everything every time. And I think that's really the trick, getting the hang of that balance. Just going back and forth with it, having a little bit of fun. But before you know it, guys, you'll be able to do this. It's a lot of fun. And for high to low bakes, that's awesome. Other stuff, like I was saying, though, might be more like mid-poly, so you might not even do a remesh workflow on it. You might just use a kind of like a mid-poly workflow where it's something more like a bevel. I don't know if this is even going to bevel, but we'll try it. Bevels can just be a chamfer, a shade smooth. You don't even need anything like that. You can use weighted normals. As long as you have a chamfer on every edge. No, not a weld. You can use a weighted normal usually to get it back to this here so it looks like it's all beveled. So you can combo things together, right? That's kind of a big thing, like being able to combo them together. That's the way a lot of vehicles are going to be made, environment art. It's just a combination of all the different little tools and tricks and different modeling workflows. It's not like one size fits all for every object. So a bevel, weighted normals, how you set those up. Also, you use like face influence, keep sharps if you have sharps, but we're doing chamfers everywhere, so it all shades correctly anyway. So you can see. That could be a game model piece. We might want to clean that one up though, so that we don't have a bunch of intersections going on. We might cut it more, to fit with this, or maybe combine those somehow, make that like one big mid poly piece. The details on the surface could just be floaters, or they can just be extra details on the surface that you don't necessarily have to combine to it. If you want, you could. But yeah, you can make like these pieces. This is part of high to low poly bakes. Maybe some of the tips of the cannons, these things. These might be combined with this to become mid poly. So if I do that, I'd have to Boolean union them perhaps, or you can even leave them floating through the mesh. A lot of game developers still do that kind of stuff, but yeah, there's a lot of, it just depends on like your project, your needs, what you think is an acceptable quality level for your art. It's there's a lot that goes into it, and this is only like for game art kind of workflows. Like it tends to work best for that. The maybe unless you're just creating a high poly to work into a VFX piece later on that you retopo it and do quads and subdivision. There's going to be studios that work entirely in quads and subdivision. They do not want this kind of mesh at all. It doesn't work for them. It doesn't render well necessarily. So you do need to learn if you're trying to just pick up 3D jobs at some point. If you're, you're going to want to kind of gear your workflow towards whatever it is you're trying to get a job in. So if you need to practice subdivision and you're going to be doing like high quality mesh that way, do it. Practice it, right? It's very important. If you're just trying to create game meshes and quick things like this, perhaps this might work for you here. Might be a really good technique to go with and start working out anyways, right? So just a quick little demo or kind of showing you guys how this works. I know you guys were pretty excited about some of the hard surface sculpting aspects that I've shown in other videos. So this is kind of like the top of the top there. Like it's one of the hardest ones I think to master, but it's definitely the most flexible. And it's a vanilla blender feature. It's not even, you don't need quad remesher for this, right? It doesn't matter that much. And it's something you can do. It's a lot of fun. So I'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. I'll check you out then, right?